We were talking earlier, and it occurred to both of us that we both grew up in different cultures. You know, so you were saying that you grew up, you know, in Coventry.
Yeah. And I'm
not
brown,
Pakistan,
just in case
Coventry.
you guys haven't noticed. But yeah.
But in the UK.
Yeah.
But surrounded by different traditions, Sikhism, Hinduism, Islam. And absorbing all of that. And I grew up here on the island, but I grew up around Buddhism. So we both kind of grew up with a very wide open kind of cross-cultural approach. And I think that's what I like about Zahir, is that he can talk about any tradition, you know, rather than just stuck in one way of seeing things. Because we're all different, aren't we? You know, one way of seeing doesn't work for another. So yeah, we both share that love of kind of a multi-disciplined approach to spirituality. But I thought I'd ask you first of all, if you don't mind, the title of the talk. It might be nice just to explain where that came from and what does it mean? You know, there's beauty in being lost.
I came here about, I think, 2 years ago, and I did a talk at the Noah Bakehouse. I don't know how many of you were there. And midway through the talk, I said there's a beauty in being lost. And I just said it and just moved on to the next thing. I remember something about that talk, but I can't really share that now. And what happened was I got home, I'm on social media, and somebody tagged me on Instagram, and there was this quote, there's a beauty in being lost. And I'd apparently said it. And then that kind of just followed me, so it would go on my social media. It's now the title of this talk. I even did a YouTube video about it as well, about being perpetually lost and being in this place of not knowing anything. Because when we're in this place of not knowing, we're open to the wonder and mystery of life. So there's such a beauty in being completely open, almost like in a childlike state, but in the body of a man or a woman. But what we find then, that's our natural way of being. And because it's our natural way of being, what we'll find is that we can live life so much more openly, so much more expansively. So what we're talking about here is something very, very practical. It's not esoteric. There's a very famous Sufi who once stated, a reality with no name is now a name with no reality. So what we're looking to do today is really just go back to this whole idea of reality. And this reality permeates every aspect of your being, every aspect of your life. So whatever your background is, whether you're in business, whether you are doing whatever, you'll find something here. Because what we're looking to do today is, like Mike said, we're not going to teach you anything, because that would be arrogance to believe that we could teach you something about yourself. It's also a misnomer as well, that we can teach. It's just a title people use to kind of get some sort of sense or meaning here. What we're looking to do is just kind of, in a sense, hold up a mirror and say, take a look, see what you see. And if you can accept that, what you'll start seeing is you'll go on a journey where you'll start seeing this expansiveness in your life. And it may lead to an inquiry where you start looking at why you do what you do, why you are in the place you're in, the relationship or whatever. But again, it becomes a very, very practical way of being. So this isn't something that we're going to do for 2 hours and then go home and just be totally different people. This is a reality that we all live in. So it's really here just to remind you. So when we're lost, that's when we're really found, which is the paradoxical nature of what's going to happen tonight. So you will hear a lot of paradoxes, but that place in the middle is where you live, where home is, and it's just to remind you that you're always home.
It's interesting because, you know, for me and you, and I imagine many of the people here tonight, there's not a beauty in being lost, you know, because we are lost. And what we want to do is find, you know, we're seekers. I mean, I've certainly been a hardcore seeker, you know, like you, spending time around enlightened teachers and hoping that you're going to get it from them. You know, they're going to say the word and the penny's going to drop. Or they're going to touch you on the head, and, you know, all your troubles are going to melt away. So I think we have a really mythologized idea, or I certainly did, of what enlightenment is, even the word. It's such a big word. I mean, we put that word on the poster. It's such a big word, you know. And if you're anything like me, you see that word and it's like, ding, you know, that's it. I need to find out what that is. But what you're talking about here is there's a beauty in being lost, you know, maybe not finding, And certainly, you know, in my experience, it's the failure ultimately to find what you thought you were looking for that's the freedom.
Well, it's like we want to find something that's never been lost.
Yeah.
But we believe it's lost, so then we take these journeys. So we go with these gurus and we think we're going to learn something. We don't. We ultimately have to come back to ourselves. So ultimately, the end of the journey that I took, I ended up on a sofa at home in Coventry and finding myself there. So I was always home. There's nothing really lost. But we believe it is. So then we come to talks like this and we hope we're going to find an answer and somebody's going to tell us something. As Michael said, we're going to give you an answer and it's just going to, you know, fall into place. Or, you know, my personal favorite, the teacher will look at you a certain way and somehow your chakras will just explode wide open and you're going to be an enlightened being. I've actually lived through that, which was quite interesting. But what we'll do at that point is we'll give our power out and we'll say, this person sitting here, us two, knows something you don't. And I can play with that and say, yes, I do. And if you come to my retreat with my secret teachings and I'll take a lot of money off you, I'll tell you that for a price. Or I might be a bit honest about it and say, I don't actually know anything different to you. To which you're going to say, no, but you do because you're sitting up there. And that creates the conversation. That creates the dialogue. But the reality is what brought you here is what already knows. It just came to recognize itself or to just rest as it is today. So if we can just rest as it is, that's absolutely perfect because we're amongst friends and this is like an age-old tradition. This has existed for thousands of years. People have come together, had a cup of tea, had a meal and just pondered just for a bit of time and then we leave with that hope that maybe we'll come back again and we'll see each other again and we'll share those stories. But it's always about reminding. It's always about reminding. A good teacher will always point back to you. And that's what this is about, pointing back to you.
Yeah, I think it's... I used to think that it was about having a certain experience. And I think that's really common. We're after, as you say, the chakras.
Yeah.
And you know, we do have experiences. I'm sure most of the people in this room have had an experience which they would say was spiritual. You know, like what was that? Who was I? Something happened. I'm sure we've all had that. Just by a show of hands, has anyone had a moment like that at any point in their lives?
Do not be shy. Put your hands up. Even if you didn't, just put the hand up.
Exactly.
Sorry, you guys are looking a bit serious here. I'm sorry, you're going to look a bit serious, so I think you guys, you know, let's just play with it and stuff. So yeah, if you want to put your hands up and stuff. So yeah.
So this is really human, you know. It's not actually spiritual, it's human. It's a human experience where suddenly we experience something bigger than the idea of ourselves, and we call that spiritual, you know. Very common. We don't talk about it, you know. We're going to have a tea break in a minute, so you can ask the person with their hand up, what happened? Because we don't have a conversation about these things. You're not down the pub talking about the time you were one with the universe, or the time your mind fell away and you realized you were nobody. We're not having a conversation about that.
Yeah.
So it's not, those things do happen. They do happen. People have experiences. But what we tend to do then is grab hold of them and think, this is it. And then you wake up the next day, it's gone. Or next month, or the next year, and you think,
I've lost it.
I've lost it.
God,
now
yeah.
you're in big trouble, because you've got to go back to the guru, you've got to pay him more money.
Out the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
It's all over, do you know what I mean? And it's, yeah.
But it's not about an experience, even though you have them. It's about, I think you just used the word, it's a recognition. Which doesn't depend on a certain experience. You can recognize something now, right now. You don't need to be sat in the lotus posture, or you don't need to be in India to recognize something, you know. So that recognition is constantly available.
Yes, it's completely here. The reality is what most of you will do is you want to find yourself, you go to India. But what you don't realize is you're traveling with yourself. You're taking your answer with you to all of these different places. And that's your process. So you're always in charge. So every guru you go to see and everything, you're the one in control. So at this moment in time, there is about 60 talks going on simultaneously. So there's what I'm saying, what you're hearing. So your conditioning is going to take away whatever you need from this. When you can see it that way, you realize that you're the master of your own ship. And if we can sit with that, and it might feel a bit uncomfortable because it's like, no, but I've come here to listen to them. If you can sit with that uncomfortable feeling that, oh God, okay, so I might know what I'm doing. And just allow yourself to feel uncomfortable, but then find that it becomes comfortable. You might find that you go to see the one teacher that's going to give you your answers, and that's you. Like one of the things I tend to do with my talks is I tend to say, look, I can give you the name of a guru who will give you your answers, it's guaranteed. And it's amazing, everybody just leans forward. So I kind of build this up and I said, this one is amazing, he's incredible. And they're like, really? Yeah, 100%, guarantee you're going to wake up and everything. And then when people go, okay, what's his name? I go, it's you. And people are so disappointed. But that's the thing, there's a disappointment here, because what you're going to find is God isn't going to come through here. He's not going to point his finger through and go, you're special. But that's because we've had these ideas. There's this very famous saying, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. And the minute we first started talking about this, it became a complication. And then books were written, then teachings happened, and then we didn't understand it, so we formalized it. And can we go to that place where we break all of that down and we just live naturally? So I was in Pakistan, 2012, and I went to this place called Multan. It's called the City of Sufis. About 140 shrines. I got there bitterly, bitterly disappointed. There was not a holy man on every corner, right? But there was a rickshaw driver, and there was a kid who made tea, and there was that guy who made me my samosas in the morning. And so I'm a bit disappointed because I've heard about this place. This is where everybody's a Sufi and everybody's realized. But I realized I couldn't talk about it. And the reason I couldn't talk about it because there was no space to talk about it, because people were too busy living it. So the purpose of this is to make this entire thing redundant. And it becomes redundant when you go inwards and you realize you don't need this. So, I would kind of say something possibly a bit controversial, make this the last talk you ever come to. And, have your break, come back, throw questions at us. Throw whatever you need answered at us. We'll either answer it or I'll say something silly like, that's not your question, if I can't answer it. Or just look off into the distance or zen-like, or just kind of say, that's the guy who actually knows. But make this the last thing you come to. And instead go inwards and start meeting yourself, because if it sparks an inquiry and we have that moment, as Mike said, we're not going to sit in a pub and talk about this stuff. But ask yourself, in your day, when do you ever contemplate? When do you ever just stop and go, what's this all about? Because I'm playing so many roles during the day. When do I actually get time for me? So there's this huge thing about self-love. And that contemplation is self-love, because we start wanting to meet ourselves. That's when we truly fall in love with ourselves. But that's when this idea of this separate self that's looking for something just collapses, and we realize there's just this one reality. And that's when it gets really interesting. That's when you can do really cool fab things like come to the Isle of Man, sit in a Swat Kameez and do a talk, do you know what I mean? Or write a book even, better.
I think one of the biggest helps, for me anyway, was coming across this word that was often used when talking about enlightenment or awakening, which was already, as in you are already enlightened. And I thought, no, I'm not. That's why I'm here. But another way they talk about it is that what we're looking for, it's not some esoteric, mystical state. It's the natural state. It's the natural state. And if it's natural, it means it's sitting on this chair right now. In fact, it's what's listening to these words right now. That's the natural state. If it's natural, you don't need to go and get it, because it's natural. It's been with you since birth. It's your natural state. Now that to me was profound, because that's the end of seeking outside. You go to enough teachers that say, you've wasted your time, go home. It's you that's carrying this within you. And then at some point you start looking, you start looking and exploring yourself, which is completely different to our culture, which is all about, maintaining a self, an ego, our roles in society, face externally, be interested in the world, don't turn your attention back onto yourself. We don't know we can do that. We don't know maybe we can even stop and experience ourselves without the stories, in our mind.
We've been conditioned outwards.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the educational system talks about attainment, and it talks about you will get this and you will get this and you will get this. So we've been conditioned in separation. So what happens is normally most children are born in this natural way of being. Well, you're all in this natural way of being right now, but then about the ages of 10, 11, most spiritual traditions say that the character splits and this idea of an individual appears. And then you spend your life defending that. It's like you create this story, then you add characters to it, it becomes very, very elaborate. And you know it's not real, but you're so in love with it now that you've got to keep it going on. It's a bit like the emperor's new clothes. So the emperor's wearing nothing, but it's that whole greater fool theory. Everybody goes, oh, this is amazing. Then the next person does. And what realization is just that child that goes, you're not wearing anything. And it's simple and it's profound, and we miss it because of its simplicity. And it's absolutely crazy because every single moment in every single day, we are constantly being invited back to who we are, whether it's walking down the street or sitting there. I was playing with Mike's kids just before this and it was great. We were just playing all these roles. I was a pirate one minute, I was a werewolf the next, and and I thought, wow. So literally what was happening is life was being picked up and put down, just as and how it needed it. But what people do is they pick something up and they go, right, I feel a bit scared now if I put that down. So I'll hold on to it. And now because I'm holding on to it, I've got to add something else onto it as well. And this character forms, and then this character feels very, very, very real. And then before we know it, we have actually just conned ourselves into believing this illusory existence is real. However, there's still hope because somewhere within us already knows that it's not, and it's just a story. And when we develop that confidence and when we examine the reasons why we've put this story into place, and we realize that we don't need these particular reasons and we can put them down, what we do is we start putting them down, because ultimately we're looking for security. If you look at the subconscious mind, it's primed for security. But true security rests in abiding as the self, being who you truly are. The pandemic showed us that. The pandemic showed how fragile our existences were. We've built empires, we're doing all the right things, and some virus appears from everywhere and shows us the fragility of life. So where is true security? And true security is resting as we truly are. Because then what we find is that we're in alignment with life. So when the pandemic hit, I was in Devon, and I remember seeing this aircraft carrier go across the bay. And I remember just thinking, it's over. That's it. The world's coming to an end. And then, like everybody else was jumping onto Zoom meetings and doing all this online stuff. And life was, just carry on talking. And somehow it just carried on talking. People kept appearing. And it was just trusting this life. And I went up and down the country, did everything in accordance with every regulation that was out there, but just trusted life. So ultimately, your fallback position, if you really want to know, is just go inwards. What's life saying to you? What's this saying to you? What's your thoughts? What's your opinions on this? And that would be interesting to hear after the break if you want to share those with us. What's it all about? Why am I here? What do I actually really want? And we can examine that. We can examine on the superficial level of, okay, well, I want a Bugatti Veyron. And then we could, I like the way you smile there and everything. So we can say, look, I want a Bugatti Veyron. And then, okay, we take it down a little bit further. Okay, well, you know what? I actually want peace of mind because I know I'm going to be happy. But okay, so I want happiness. And then we can examine happiness and say, well, what's happiness? Because happiness could be temporal as well. I'm happy one moment, I'm sad the next. So then we kind of go, okay, well, these things are temporary. And they're always passing. They're always passing. What is it that doesn't pass? And that's who you truly are. And that thing that doesn't pass doesn't live in the world with this whole kind of ebb and flow. It sees the illusory nature of this. So the Sufis have a saying where they say, granted the world is an illusion, but we still have to live in it. But when we live in it as we truly are, we see the freedom here. We see the expansiveness of this, that everything in this room right now is pointing back to you. So the most important person in this talk right now is actually you. So you've got to ask yourself the question, well, if I'm that special, and this is not to build up ego, ask yourself the question, well, who am I? Who am I really? Why am I here? And that could possibly start something. And it can start off as a whisper, it can start off as I was with a teacher, I did the traditional thing. I took a sheikh and, it was very, very rigid, so the sheikh would walk to a room, I'd stand up. We wouldn't have our meal before the sheikh had his meal and everything. And I did this for about 7-8 years, and it was all about khidmat, you know, what people term as seva, so basically doing service. And then one day, 99% of my journey, my supposed journey, died when I went, I actually want to know what this guy knows. And that was the first time I'd ever been honest with myself. So when we ask this question, who am I? It asks us to be honest with ourselves, because let's be honest, we can lie to each other. And we do that, you know, with the characters that we have and all of this stuff. But the question is, like, if we're honest with ourselves, when we meet ourselves, we realize we can't lie to ourselves. And that destroys this idea of seeking completely, because then you realize you can't live a lie. Because I assert that there is no one seeking in this room, that there are no seekers. And all you have to do is come back at me after the break and say, no, well, I think something's going on. But that's where we'll have that conversation. And I'm never disproved. Because my premise is that you're the perfection you seek right now. That it is already here. As a matter of fact, it's so immediate that breathing is much more laborious than your natural well-being right now. Can you accept that? Even slight bit of it, just a little bit. And that incremental movement towards who you are may just help you realize who you truly are. Because it's not about us. Our stories are irrelevant. Your story is the exciting one. Mm-hmm. So it's an invitation. And it's whether you'll accept the invitation.
It's also a very courageous thing to do. You know, seeking is all the security is in seeking, you know. And then you meet other seekers, and they're all on the same journey, and it's amazing. You know, you find this whole community. In a way, you are seekers. You know, you have a great conversation on the tea break because you're all in the same boat. To some degree, you're all interested in who am I, what am I. But we can play at that. And for those people that have had moments where suddenly the ground opens up, or you know something big happens, you know, how many of you people that have had that were also terrified or scared about what that was and what does that mean? So that's the flip side of standing on your own 2 feet. I mean, Chogyam Trungpa, you know, Tibetan teacher, said, enlightenment is the ego's ultimate disappointment, which is perfect.
Oh, totally.
Like your ego is going to be so disappointed when you realize that it's just you sat on this chair. That's reality. That's the reality you're looking for. You know, it's God looking through your eyes. That's it. Oh, just this. This is boring. That's it. He said it was going to be disappointing. We want special powers. You know, we want special stuff. But it's the mind that wants the special stuff. Your natural state is fulfilled, always present. It's intimate with everything that arises. It has no identity. You know, it's spacious, it's open. But it's boring. The mind is looking for the fireworks.
It's Harry Potter for grown-ups, isn't it?
Harry Potter for grown-ups?
Yeah, that's what spirituality is. I remember the first school that I was with, and there'd be all these stories of, I saw the sheikh in my dream, and then I was flying through the air. And then, you know, one came out with a classic, you know, my love was so much that I could just look at something and turn it into gold. And you're like, okay. But it's incredible when you drink the Kool-Aid, the kind of stories you believe. Because what I find is, when you go down that route, what happens is you leave your mind at the door. You leave your critical faculties at the door. And then you're open to absolutely everything. And that's where obviously cults and things like that come in, because of the fact that the mind says, no, I can't accept what Mike said. But he's telling the truth. But we don't want the truth. We want some value. I've come to a talk here and I actually want some value out of this. Or I've done that mindfulness course and I want some value. So can we be here without any intentions? Can we be here without anything? Without any want or need? And just to rest? And that's kind of interesting, because when you left your house, an intention formed very subtly. I'm going to this talk tonight. So it's about kind of looking at those subtleties as to why the mind does what it does, and seeing whether we can just put those down. That's when we can accept that it's as simple as we're just sitting here and you're sitting here. It's that immediate. I remember talking to a teacher many, many years ago, and he said, what are you doing right now? And I went, I'm walking down the street, and went, that's it. I'm like, no, it's not. You know, behave. You know, because I wanted it to be something else, but now I realize he was saying the most innocent, profound, honest thing to me, that it was just me walking down the street. You're here. That's the answer.
But it's strange how we're so conditioned against that message.
Oh yeah, God, yeah.
You know, and you know, like you, we sat with, you know, we share some kind of the same teachers actually,
Yeah.
or one of them at least. And you know, the message is so profound and direct, but I remember just sitting there thinking, I don't understand. He's not telling me what to do. He's not giving me a special technique or practice to go off and do. I'm just, what are you saying? What do you mean this is it? Like, give me something to do. I don't get it. And then it takes a while, years sometimes, for the penny to drop, where you suddenly realize, hang on, are they suggesting that this ordinary moment of my life is the ultimate reality? I'm like, yeah, that is what he's saying. And then it starts to get scary, because that means all of my efforts and my plans and my practices mean nothing in the face of the fact that we are fundamentally perfect in that sense. It means there's nothing else to do. You know, I remember a great Zen story, and a man sitting down, a monk sitting down, meditating every day, you know, 10 hours straight, not moving. And then the teacher Rinzai, very famous Zen master, walks over to him and sits down next to him and takes out a stone and a little piece of cloth, and he starts rubbing the stone frantically. And after a while, the man meditating can hear this annoying sound and sort of peeks to his side and sees the master, the enlightened Zen master, frantically rubbing this stone. And he says, Zen master, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm rubbing this stone to make a diamond. And he says, you can't turn a stone into a diamond. And he says, well, how will meditation allow you to recognize your true nature? It's what you are. It's not something to get, it's what's doing the meditation, you know. I'm sure, anyone have a Buddha statue at home? They're pretty famous, you know, pretty popular, maybe in the garden. So, or a Hindu statue, but you might notice that they have these halos. You know, so the Buddha is meditating and he has this kind of halo, as it were, behind him. So at home I've got a big statue, you've seen it, a big statue of Shiva on the mantelpiece.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, and he has this halo behind his head. And I used to think that the halo he had on his head was as a result of effort. So Shiva's, because of Shiva's meditation, divine meditation, he has become holy. Or you see a Buddha and you think because of the Buddha's enlightenment, he is now holy. Now, okay, that is one way we can look at that. You know, all the traditions talk about a kind of purification process where you're less egoic, you're less mammal, you know, you're less just in all your mammal urges and cravings. You can kind of step back and not join in with that anymore, which is kind of freedom whilst you have a body, you know. You still have to pee, but, you know, you don't have to do everything else that, no, you can step back from that. But then it struck me one day that we can understand that halo in completely the opposite way. It's not that he's achieving a halo. The halo is a symbol for the ultimate silent reality that's listening to these words right now. It's not something he's produced. It's the background which allows Shiva to even exist. You know, it's the stillness, it's the awareness, it's the whatever word we put on it.
It appears from there. Everything appears from there.
Yes.
And everything returns to there. And the actual conversation's in silence. And everything is emanating from the silence. So all of this is happening in silence. Although there's words appearing and it feels like life is happening and it's very real, it's actually all just, like you said, just happening in the appearance. It's almost like the background is actually the foreground. But we believe the foreground, what we believe as a foreground is just the background, it's just the kind of the noise, I suppose. Don't know what else to say about that.
But that's an interesting point, just talking about listening, Because if you're actually listening right now, like really listening, you'll notice that your mind is quiet and you're just listening. That's the silence. That's it. You know. But we fill our heads with noise, we'll put the radio on, we'll drown that silence out, and we'll think, what's he talking about? Silence? I don't know what silence is. The silence is where you're listening from now as we're talking.
But if you think about it, that's when the mind comes in. That's when the chatter. I think someone said, what's wrong with this moment unless you think about it? And the minute we try to understand it, which is why, please don't try to understand this at all. You know, I tried for most of my life and it didn't work. When we try to understand it, when we try to go, well, why is this happening? Why is he saying this? That's where it gets complicated, because then your mind will want to take something away, but then you're in bondage again. The mind is similar to a butler who took over the house. So you had this house, you know, it's your mansion, and the butler took over. And now you believe he's in charge. So you're slaves in your own home. And it's about realizing that, no, hold on, that butler's here to serve me. So the mind is just a tool of creation. If we can put it that way, then the mind can work very efficiently. And what that basically means is we don't have to hold information then. We can just allow this trusting to happen. So, you know, I remember doing a talk and a hedge fund manager came in and I started talking about a book called The New Market Wizards that I'd read many years ago. But there wasn't like, oh, let's pull it out the memory banks and everything. It just appeared. So the mind is just there to create, and the mind is just there to allow information to come in. So that way we don't have to kind of jam the mind with information, all that stuff. So you just allow the mind to almost be open. So it will just take in what it needs to take in, but we don't try to hold it. When we try to hold it, that's when it gets a bit crazy, because then we try to say, well, what were they talking about? Why did he say that? What was the story about Shiva? It's being heard. It's gone now. Let it go. It'll just come as and how it needs to. But then what we find is we find a universality in the mind. So what can happen is everything works so much more efficiently. Memory works so much more efficiently. You know, I remember talking to someone about a year later, we talked, and he was like, you know, for a guy I only met for an hour, you seem to know a lot about me. But it was just, there's just this connection, not even a connection, no, there's just this connectivity. It's all one. So as such, there's really just a mind, a universal mind. And that doesn't mean that's something we have to grasp or hold. And that's just an aspect of this consciousness as well. So you're not just the mind, you're more. So what you'll find is the borders of what you are aren't just limited to this body or to this mind. They're expansive, they're more. There's this connectivity, everything is actually one, appearing in a multitude of ways. So it's almost like this giant mirror that's mirroring itself back. So the answers are all around us. Why am I feeling like this? Why am I staring at you? Why are you looking at me? So everything is feedback. And in NLP they call it feedback, but yeah, that's something else. So everything is reminding us, everything's bringing us back home, only to realize that, well, we're already home. And that's when we can just put things down. So you'll do this until you don't need to do this. When you have that security that what they're talking about, what they're constantly repeating, is who we actually are. So really, if you look at it this way, the educational system is based on repetition, but it's from the original teachings. Repetition, repetition, repetition. You are, you are, you are. So sometimes we can even use our mind when we're using mantras or zikr to just repeat, repeat, repeat until the idea takes hold. And then the idea destroys all other ideas. And then we realize we can throw that idea as well. Because when we rest as is, nothing really holds. Nothing really kind of has space to kind of gather. So it's almost like breathing, in the sense that you don't, you know, when we breathe in, we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out. We don't stop breathing. We don't try to clog up anything. We don't try to hold our emotions in. Everything just flows. So everything is just completely and utterly, and I've lost the word I wanted to say. So there you go.
But you were talking about, repeat, repetition,
yes,
and remind, and that's one of the translations of mindfulness originally, because mindfulness is just a made up, English translation of a Pali Buddhist word, is to remember. To remember. What are we remembering? Well, we're remembering to come back. To come back where? Well, to come back to where we are, to the present, you know, to step away from our stories of who I was in the past, of who I might be in the future. You know, we're stepping out of those virtual realities that trigger us so much, and we're stepping into our actual experience, which is home. You know, the present moment, this right now that's the gateway, you know, and that's why, as you're saying, you know, the mind, you know, it's a really useful tool. I love my mind, you know. I used to hate it, and now I think it's an amazing tool. I think the human mind is this genius. It's a creative genius, but it's only the mind that asks why. Like the silence doesn't ask why. You know, it doesn't say, what's the meaning of my life? Only the mind asks that. You know, you ask that to a child, you know, if I ask like Primrose or something, what's the meaning of life? The question does not make sense to a 6-year-old. Not because she doesn't understand the profound philosophical, it just literally is meaningless because it's a concept. Who says life has to have a meaning? I'm just playing with my dolls, that's it. And yeah, that is it. And it's we that become clever. What's the Rumi quote about cleverness?
I think it's something about buying bewilderment. Buy bewilderment and destroy your reputation, go where you fear to live, that kind of thing. And he's literally dance while, you know, with your bandages wide open and, and things like that. And he's really saying, just let this go. Because Rumi's story, he was known as Sultan al-Ulama, which basically means the king of scholars. And one day he meets a madman, or a supposed madman, who grabs the reins of his donkey or horse, depending on which version you've read, and asks him a question. Rumi then comes off his horse and answers the question. And then he believes that a plume of smoke came out of his head, and then that was it. He was never the same again. But that's one of the things in the Sufi traditions, the stories do get a bit embellished, I must admit. I remember hearing one story about 2 teachers who were supposedly meant to have met, but they were in 3 different centuries or something like that, or 2 different centuries. But the principles are the same. So you'll find that these stories are across all cultures. So there's this story about, you know, a man who has a horse and his son falls off the horse and he breaks his leg and he goes, we'll see. But you'll find that story echoed. So there is this, in a sense, way home. And depending on where you are, here it's mindfulness. In China, it might be called Buddhism. In India, Pakistan, it might be called, I don't know, Advaita and Sufism. But everyone's pointing back to the same thing. And it's whether we can look at the thing that's being pointed at. Because as Mike said earlier, and I agree, it takes courageousness. It takes courageousness to call yourself out on your own story. And it's whether, you know, you'll want to do that. Otherwise, this is a great evening's entertainment. Or it's something that makes you kind of go, well, yeah, and go inwards. What do you think's missing?
Yeah, what if there wasn't anything missing? You know, what then? Then we don't need the tea breaks, we just go home now. You know, you come home and tell your partner, hey, do you know what I found out? There's nothing missing. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and live in a cave or quit your job or stop making money. It doesn't mean any of that whatsoever, because it's just an understanding that you now have about you and your life. But as Zahir says, we still live in the world. I mean, that's what we do. We live in the world.
If anything, you really live in the world. Because the blinkers are off now.
Yeah.
There's no excuses. There's no story to hold you back. You know, I remember doing a talk and there was this woman and we were talking and I said, well, you know who I am? And she was like, yeah, I played up on this one. And I said, so, you know, you believe me to be this enlightened being? She's like, yeah. And I went, okay, fine. I've planted the seed of enlightenment in your heart. You're free. Go. She stayed there for the next 3 hours. Because what it is we're terrified of putting our stories down because then it leaves us with no excuses. Imagine living with no excuses. There's no place to hide. Wherever you shine, you know what I mean, you can shine into the darkness, you see it all. It's all completely open. Then how do you live from that openness? And that's terrifying to a mind that's limited in its capacity. And that's why the mind comes here to these talks and kind of goes, okay, I want to hear an explanation that will keep me satisfied. But your mind's never going to be satisfied. It's never going to be satisfied, because if it was satisfied, it would let go. But it has a job to do, and it needs to do its job. So it keeps you on this merry-go-round. Yeah, that was a really good talk, but I'm sure there's something behind it. Do you know what I mean? And there's some secret teachings behind it. I remember this young man who comes to my talks, and he started this rumor that there were secret teachings. The one I'm talking about. And now it's just kind of, it's grown a life of itself. But it's kind of backfired on him now, because he's now kind of, yeah, there's something missing. And it's really just the mind playing a lovely little trick on him by saying, oh, it's more than what it is. It's not. But your mind's going to tell you, no, they're warming up, they're going to get to the second half, I'm going to have my tea break, and then I'm going to start asking them questions that this is all very lovely, but what do you mean it's just sitting on a chair? What do you mean it's just listening to this talk? No, that's just silly. And then what you'll do is you'll take everything you've learned and you'll say, but I read this book, and in that book it said this and this and this. So that contradicts your position. Okay, but it's all paradoxical. So that just creates, again, that conversation, that merry-go-round of the mind wanting to find some meaning here.
It's like the butler refuses to quit.
Yeah.
And just when you get near to it, or you've found the perfect teacher, or you've read the perfect book, your mind the butler will then say, yeah, but have you heard this guy? Or she says something totally different. And off we go again. Putting all that down is, meditation. That's the value of meditation, is that we allow that story to come to rest and to dissolve. And even though it to the mind, the idea of firing the butler or not knowing what's going to happen in the next 10 seconds is terrifying to the mind. And we might think, how could I ever live without that? How would life be if I didn't have a story? But you already know what that's like, because every night since birth, we've all climbed into bed, we've all fallen asleep, and at some point we've all gone into deep sleep. In deep sleep, there is no you, there is no story, there is no world, there is no problem until you open your eyes. Put your hands up if you enjoy going to sleep.
I've not actually had any, but yeah.
Yeah, you're tired, aren't you?
I'm tired.
So it's so natural and simple. We experience it every night, whether you think you're enlightened or not. The word doesn't mean anything. We go into that state every night. We can't wait. We can't wait to get into bed, to disappear. That disappearance shows you cannot be the story in your head, because it disappears. What you are, well, what is that? What is that state? I mean, you can't touch it. It has no form. It has no edge. Where are you in it?
Exactly. Where are you in it? Where could you possibly be in that state?
Okay, tea break. That's a cliffhanger.
It's like the 1001 Nights. I don't know if anybody's ever read that book, The 1000 Nights and One, where Shahzadi tells a story to the Caliph, and just at the tipping point, when the dawn sun rises, she just goes, oh, it's time to go to sleep. So, see you guys after the break.
So, it would be really interesting, I suppose, for both of us to open it up. I know the way Zahir works is unstructured.
Yeah.
Whereas I tend to be quite structured. Have you noticed? That's the difference. But it would be great just to open it up for anyone, just if they wanted to ask a question, or ask us to talk a little bit about something we've not talked about, or a certain theme, or something that maybe we've not mentioned. Please, you could just raise your hand maybe, and this is when nobody raises their hands, because nobody has any questions, because it makes complete sense.
I suppose just an observation, really.
I thought we were going to get out home. I thought we were going to get home early then.
Get home
then
early.
You had to raise your hand in. No worries.
Just chatting in the break, it really made me sort of realise how prominent butler isn't only running the house. For me personally, it feels like he's trying to control half the street alongside, and just letting go of that activity can be so difficult at times.
Yeah.
Because I'm aware that there is peace behind that.
Yes.
And it is let go.
Well, I mean, so I remember when the butler, if we stick with that analogy, you know, it is. I have to think of a name for my butler. But he used to rule the house. As Zahir was saying, he was the boss of the house. And that was very difficult for me. You know, I struggled a lot. And then when I had my experience where I realized that I wasn't the butler, and I was much more than I'd ever imagined myself to be, and much less at the same time, paradoxically, I realized that the butler was now out of a job. You know, he no longer had a job. But the thing was, he still turned up every day. Like, he still did what he did, but now it was like, okay, but you actually don't have a job anymore. You're not employed by me anymore. Now you're just the butler. So it went from the butler who was ruling the house to being just the butler. And sometimes, you know, the butler is there and it's doing its job. It's planning, it's organizing, it's narrating something, it's judging something. I mean, that's just what the human mind is made to do. And I think it's a fantasy to think that the aim is to stop that. That is not, well, I couldn't be talking to you right now without my mind being engaged. So there's the practical use of the human mind, which is an amazing tool, but just understand that it's just a tool. It's just the butler. If you want to know the meaning of life, don't ask the butler. And also, you know, the butler doesn't take up the entire house. The butler is one figure within the whole space of the house, as it were. So there's parts of the house where the butler isn't. You know, so there's parts of the house where the room is empty and silent. So there's always, you know, parts of ourselves that we can experience as quiet and empty, even though the butler still, you know, mops up here and there, or, you know, tidies the pantry. We can understand that it's just the butler and it's just doing its job. You know, even that understanding is quite powerful. We don't need to get rid of the mind.
It's quite helpful to find those other rooms where the butler isn't.
Where the butler isn't, yeah.
You can mess with it a bit further if you want. You can ask yourself why your butler wants to control half the street. Because then that kind of brings up this question of control. So you can ask yourself, why do I want to control? And that can lead somewhere as well, because the minute you said that, well, you know, my butler wants to control half the street as well. Ask yourself, why do I want to do that? And why is that happening as well? And what can happen there is that we can let go of this idea of control. But then if we let go of this idea of control slowly but surely, we can start seeing that we don't need to be in control. And we can trust in not knowing all the answers. And then when we trust in not knowing, what we'll find is that it expands outwards. And it's kind of funny because the butler becomes insignificant. He starts shrinking in the expanse of it. And he shrinks and he shrinks and he shrinks, and then he's just the butler. And then if we then call the butler the mind, we realize, as Mike said, it's just a tool. So the mind is your friend. Do you know what I mean? Just befriend it. And if you really want to get in charge, take responsibility for it. Because sometimes what can happen in spiritual circles is we really beat up on our mind. And it's like, but it's your mind. Take ownership of it. And stop it doing that by realizing that you're prior to mind. So as you said, you know, I know I'm the peace behind it. So rest in the peace behind it. So you do know there's peace behind it. So just go there. That's the empty room where the butler cannot exist. And then what you can do is you can look at the mind. So you're then able to see the mind in its totality, because you are that which is prior to mind. Then what you'll find is the mind will just go into this state of efficiency, a bit like we were talking about earlier on. The mind will work very, very efficiently. And this is something that can be applied in absolutely everything, because when we do live from that place which is prior to mind, prior to thought, you know, whatever you want to call it, we live in a very, very natural way. So test it. Test it in your jobs, test it in your relationships. So really what's being pointed to is something really, really practical. It's not an esoteric talk, you know what I mean? If that was going to be the case, then I'd have started chanting in Sanskrit or something ridiculous like that. But it's a very, very practical thing when we step back from the mind and realize that the mind is an aspect of us. It's not all of us. But I think sometimes what can happen is when we come to these places, we misunderstand the mind. As Mike said, he's using his mind. The words are forming, it's coming out. So the mind is doing what the mind needs to do. So let's not beat up on the mind. Let's just befriend the mind. Let's just accept the mind for what it does. And yes, as Mike said, it's going to turn up every single day. That's fine. Let it do that. But then what can happen is when it throws up thoughts and all this stuff and everything, you're in that position to be able to accept that. Because thoughts are like little children. They're running around. It's up to you which one you want to kind of hold on to or let go and all that stuff. So you can do it that way as well. So you can play with this mind as well. And you can make it your friend, and then you can kind of say, okay, I'd like you to do this, 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 and then it starts working really, really efficiently. Hence that thing I was talking earlier about memory. So, you know, I could be talking also like, I don't know, tell the Kim Kardashian story. I'm not going to tell the Kim Kardashian story. But the mind, if it said that, I'd be like, okay, right, guys, it's just coming. Because when we silence the mind, what happens, when the mind goes silent, what you'll find is that when the mind does speak, it's actually efficient then. So, you know, I could be, to give an example, the last talk that I did here, me and Mike were discussing it earlier on. And as we were talking, Mike goes that, you know, he was just silent as I was speaking. But there was a thought that came up, and it was a story of two famous sages who met, and one asked the other a question. And I, at the exact moment, was on the stage talking, and I remember just thinking, and that story came up, I was like, no, I don't want to say it. But Mike had picked it up. But then we see the connectivity. So sometimes what can happen is that, you know, you're thinking something and it's said. Or you're going to say something and the other person's thinking it. So we are already in this state. And it's whether we can start trusting that. And as we start trusting it, we start building a bit of confidence in it. Then we can play with the mind. Then we start seeing that these generally accepted ideas on spirituality aren't actually true. And that's why, going back to what Mike said earlier on, enlightenment's a massive disappointment, because it's not what we thought it was. There's the rub, not what we thought it was, which is again the mind. So it's everything, and yet it's absolutely nothing. And that paradoxical nature stops the mind. It stills the mind so that the mind can be in this place of efficiency then. So that when the mind does speak and it doesn't give us this, I think in psychology say we have 50,000 thoughts a day. When we bring it down to the thoughts that really matter, then the mind becomes an ally. And it helps us express. And that's what you're seeing here. There's no separation. So the mind is working efficiently here and just bringing up whatever needs to be brought up. So because of that, you know, we've gone from the butler into rooms, into houses, and yet it's all just one thing. It's all connected. So that's when the mind gets interesting, because then it becomes your friend. Then it helps you. Sorry, yes.
I was just going to say, yeah, and that's such an important theme, because, you know, we're all culturally in the midst of a mental health crisis. I mean, you mentioned the lockdown. Because we're never taught how to be with our minds in the first place, you know, so we're just swamped. We automatically identify with our thoughts as in, that's me. So if my mind is a mess, I'm a mess. You know, how do I work with that? But as you were saying, you know, you can learn to work with your mind and improve it and befriend it. That's really important, because often in spirituality, I remember myself thinking I have to kill my mind. I've got to get rid of it. I've got to live in a state of no thought. And meeting other people that were talking about that's what you have to do. And after a while, just realizing that, so I'm gonna try and kill my mind. Well, that's two things there. You know, I'm at war with myself. That doesn't sound like enlightenment.
It's a duality. It's another duality. Yeah.
So that's not the way. Fighting yourself is just a fight. That's what results in that. You know, fighting yourself is just more fight. But the reason that we can befriend the butler, or the mind, and make the mind more efficient and make the mind kinder and generous and more attentive and practical is because it's trainable. You know, our human mind is entirely trainable. The reason it's trainable is because it's not what you are. Right? You all have pets. Is the pet you? No, the pet is the pet. You're you. You are the one that trains the pet. The pet can't train itself. Okay? So the reason we can train the mind is because you're not the mind. You have a mind, yes, you have thoughts, but you are not reducible to those thoughts. You are not reducible to the mind. That's why we can train it and befriend it. Otherwise, we'd all be stuck.
You gave the mind that power. If you are that which is prior to mind, then you gave it that power, which then begs the question, who are you? So it always goes back to that question, who are you? Or who am I? And that allows us to expand out into what we actually truly are. And that's when we start seeing, we can't kill our mind because it's a tool. And you use tools, you don't kill tools.
Mm.
And, say for example, we did kill the mind and we became thoughtless, emotionless, had no feelings, we would just be just automatons. And then we would lose what it means to be us. We'd lose our humanity. We'd lose what really defines us, and then we wouldn't really be living. Then there'd be no life. There'd be no need for any of this. And everything would just be bland. There'd be no colour. There'd be nothing.
That's the misconception. I've spoken to many people, and at some point they'll say, oh, I thought the whole point was to get rid of my thoughts, stop feeling, stop having emotions, because they're all, that's the chaos, is emotions and feelings and all the human stuff. Surely the enlightened one is the one that's got rid of all of that content. It's actually not the case at all.
If anything, he's more human.
Yeah.
Or she is more human. Because you're really living. If anything, what you find then, that life will present even more challenges, but they're challenges which are literally just allowing us to explore deeper and deeper into who we truly are. Or just expand, whichever way you want to look at it. And that's when we're really in that real juiciness of life. We're really living, as opposed to we're living with a filter, or we're living with a veil. I can see this, but I can't really see this. So there's a very famous teacher who, I remember he was having a bit of a rant, and he said, you've never seen anything as this table will end you, because we've never even seen the table. Because we have an idea of what the table is, so we're looking at it through our conditioning. So when we live openly, what happens is that conditioning just gets put down. It doesn't mean it disappears anywhere. You're still going to be who you are. Unfortunately, you're still going to have to pay your bills the next day. Unfortunately, you're still going to have probably some of it, but you'll just see through it. You see that, the transparency of things. And in that, there's a real sense of freedom, and there's a real sense of play. But at the same time, you can be completely and utterly engaged in anything that you do. So I remember seeing somebody who was making a cup of tea, and I've never seen that level of focus in making a cup of tea. It was inspiring to watch, because he was present in making tea. And he was present in every aspect of his life. So he was alive. Most of the times we're doing most of this unconsciously. I've got to make a cup of tea, got to do the toast, got to do this. And you then do a disservice to who you truly are. You also do a disservice to the mind as well, because you have this tool that's very, very efficient, and you're using it at maybe part of its capacity, which is why they say that we use maybe 2 to 3% of our mind. There was a really good book by an author called Robert Anton Wilson, and he goes, what we see as spiritual experiences may just be changes in the brain. So we can even throw the idea of spirituality out here and say that really what we're talking about is the mind just working much more efficiently. So imagine your mind working much more naturally and much more efficiently. What would that do? So it could be that this is all about mind, which is kind of opening something up. I didn't think we would be talking about the mind as much as we are, but it could be that.
Thanks,
as well.
Andrew.
Where's Andrew? Right, okay, there's his fault and everything. Here was me thinking I was going to have an easy gig here tonight,
Yes.
you know what I mean? But, Mans is doing this. So, yeah.
And just to keep on. Because it is so important. Because we may not be sat on the chair thinking, oh, I'm enlightened, or I've recognized my natural state, but we're all sitting here with a mind that we know, and we know how problematic it is. But just to continue, just what you said there about the man making the cup of tea, and that level of focus. And the beautiful thing about that is, you don't have to sit still, on a meditation cushion to go into that level of focus. Just practice focusing on whatever you are doing in the moment, and becoming concentrated on that. And then two things happen. Not only do you become concentrated on the object, so now you are fully alive to what's in front of you, the actuality of what you're experiencing, not an idea in your head getting in the way and saying, you've seen a table, You don't need to see another table. As Zahir said, you've never seen that table before. You've never seen yourself. Next time you look in the mirror, it's new. You've never seen your hand before. You've never seen this before. The mind tells you, we don't need to look. How tragic. We don't even need to look. When the truth is, we've not seen any of it before, but we live as if we don't need to look. So we concentrate on the thing in front of us, but when we do that, the mind itself becomes concentrated. Now, what does a concentrated mind feel like? It's quiet, it's still, there's no concepts arising because it's focused on what's happening. There's no timeline, in the past I did this, in the future I might become enlightened. With a concentrated mind, all of that disappears, which is another way of talking about meditation. So the man making the cup of tea, he is in a state of meditation with the cup of tea.
What I love to do is just present. How often are we present in our lives? And, sorry, how often are we just living on autopilot? And when we live on an autopilot, we're never there. So do we actually really live? And I see that. I mean, I live in Manchester and everybody lives at 300 miles per hour. And it's all about, the next experience, the next experience, the next experience will give me my happiness. And all they need to do is just stop and just be present with whatever's happening. And in that presence, there's acceptance as well. If I could be present and accept that making a cup of tea is it, that's my answer. And I can accept that, then everything just opens up. It transforms, because an acceptance is very, very transformative. And most of us hover above acceptance. We never accept the moment because we want to form some idea, we want to put some veil or filter. And in that sense, most of us are never present. So the answer is, can you be present? Sorry, yes. Who said that? Yeah, no, far away. I was in my flow there. I was just about to give them the secret of enlightenment, but you just killed it. Oh, well, so yes. Sorry, everybody. No, it's cool.
The mind is acting up because it's not being used properly, and when your body and the mind is engaged together, then it quietens down, and because it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, you could say it's trying to grab your attention.
Yeah. And
you're not listening. Because everything's kind of talking to us. Everything's saying, remember who you are. Remember who you are. It's like, the Roman emperors used to have somebody walk behind them, whispering into their ear, remember you're mortal, remember you're mortal. Well, life is walking with you saying, remember who you are, remember who you are, remember who you are. And when you remember, then there's no need for that. And sometimes that will happen, the mind will act up, that relationship goes really horribly wrong. And you thought you did everything right, that job blows up, I don't know, you lose a ton of money in Bitcoin or something like that, and it causes pain. And that pain is an invitation. It's like, ow, why did that happen? Because life is constantly calling you back to who you are. The whole purpose of all of this is to know thyself. There's a saying, sorry, I'll say it in Punjabi in Urdu. It says, Jisne apne aap ko pachana, usne apne Rab ko pachana. He who recognizes himself recognizes his Lord. And that's when we recognize the sovereignty of who we truly are. And that's when we realize that we are both lover and beloved. And in that sense, we are always in the embrace of our love, and we're home. And because we're home, then we're safe, we're secure. And that's what we look for when we accumulate wealth, or we go into that relationship, just that momentary moment where you can just go, oh. But imagine if you could just, oh, and that would be permanent. So I buy that brand new car and I feel really good about it. And then the feeling goes. A couple of weeks later, it's just a car. Now imagine that feeling, that yes, in that acceptance of that, it never goes away. So it never comes, it never goes. That's who you truly are. That perpetual wow, which simultaneously is very, very ordinary as well. But that's the amazing thing about it, that we realize, oh my God, it was so ordinary. That I went to the mountaintop, I took the teacher, I engaged in all these practices, and the diamond that I was seeking was me.
There's a great story about that from, I think her name was, is it Alexandra Neil? She was a French lady that went to Tibet in the 20s, or one of the first women, anyway, French women. And she became a Tibetan practitioner. Maybe she became a nun or something, but she was one of the first Westerners to go to Tibet when it was still like a hidden kingdom. and practicing there. And they did all these esoteric Tibetan, if you know anything about Tibetan Buddhism, I mean, it's fascinating. Lots of very esoteric practices, including one where she had to imagine a person, create a person in her mind, and do it with so much energy that she then began to see this person following her around externally. As in, she'd literally conjured up a person. And this is all part of their practices. And then at some point, after years of these very kind of, difficult practices, they said, okay, you've reached the level now where we're just going to give you the secret of life, the meaning of life. We're going to reveal the great mystery to you. And so she was like, wow, this is going to be amazing. After all the stuff I've done, this is going to be fantastic. What is it? And they said, it's just this. It's just this. This is it. Your life is it. And she said, why didn't you tell me this at the start? And they said, if we'd have told you then, you would not have believed us.
Has anybody ever watched Kung Fu Panda? And you got the Dragon Scrolls. And what are the Dragon Scrolls in the end? What does he see when he opens the Dragon Scrolls? That's it. So this thing is always talking to us. It's always telling us the answer. It's even in popular culture now as well. I mean, forget about reading the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, or the Bible and everything. We've all seen Kung Fu Panda. So I know that sounds kind of crazy, and everyone's like, okay, so he's a humorous one out of the two. But that just shows you reality is always speaking to you.
The thing is, it's very difficult on a day-to-day basis. For example, in the story that you alluded to before, I am the butler. Okay, so I am the one who's very much more than I certainly.
So you're the butler.
I am the
So we found you at last. You've been hiding. I was wondering why I was looking at you.
Well, certainly it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
I'd say the rest of the family are much more open to this, and I've probably learned much more.
I'd say you're more open to it than they are.
Quite possibly, because
Almost definitely.
I listen to the snippets that
Yeah.
that they come out, and
Yeah.
I have to admit I don't read the books and all the
Where you from? Where's that accent from?
laugh.
Sorry, where?
North of the island.
Oh, right, North England. Sorry, it's just like really weird. I was on Loganair and I heard Scottish. So I don't know why I kind of heard Scottish in your accent. I was like, my man's from Glasgow.
And then Irish is after.
Oh, right, so you've got that's a mad combination. I'll give you an example of that. I was in London. I was going to this concert, and there was this woman there, and she was there with her husband, and we got into a conversation, and it kind of went down this route, and he was like your corporate type. My man was like corporate, and the wife was very, very spiritual. By the end of the conversation, they were having a domestic over me, because what was really interesting was the wife was like, but I saw him first. Because what I found was that although she was supposedly a spiritual one, this guy, when I started speaking to him, was really resonating with this stuff. So it was kind of interesting, because the minute you start speaking just reminded me of that. Because sometimes those who don't think they are actually are.
Oh, I don't think I have. But
Which means you are.
I won't disagree with you.
Play with me, Father of Michael.
The thing is that whenever what I find is that the snippets that I found, I'm not even the same person I was maybe even 3 to 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I think what it does, it percolates into your being yourself. You don't
Yes.
have to say, well, what did chapter 6 say, or what did chapter 4, page 6 say?
No, you don't.
I find myself picking these things up, probably from my wife, from the boys, from Michael, different bits and pieces. But if I really on it, I can see myself putting it more into practice sometimes than the rest of them. Do you know what I mean?
No, that's why I said you're the one. You're Neo. Literally.
But the challenge that I have...
He missed that one completely. Completely missed it. I said, you're Neo. You're like the one. You know what I mean? You're going to bring balance to the force and stuff and everything.
But the thing is that I find that the difficulty that I have is that when I'm at work in an environment whereby you are more focused, it's much more difficult to step out and to be able to do it. Yet whenever
That's where you've got to be really present. So I'll give you an example. I used to talk to this investment banker, and it was really amazing. The guy was like, Mr. Alpha ran an investment bank and all this stuff and everything. And he used to just get tortured when he came into the rooms anyway, because nobody understood who he was. So there was this young guy who used to be like, why are you here and all this stuff. that offers you such an opportunity. Because that's what I've been saying all evening, this is practical. So this stuff that's seeping into you, try and see it in your work. You'll work much more efficiently.
Yeah, I think disagree. And
Yeah.
to be honest, I've actually, I think it's much more fun.
Yes.
Whenever you see, you know, you're born, you die, you come into the world, you go out of the world with exactly the same.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yes.
And everything else in between is just a state of mind. Is what
Okay.
I've come to.
I'd say take it out of the state of mind and stop making it so bland and make it colourful and play. Like, you know, they've proven that I think 20 hours of learning can be achieved in 4 hours of play. So if we look at it from that place of play, which is accepting the expansiveness that's seeping into you now, because sometimes this thing can go, it's like a thief in the night, it just comes along, steals all your ideas, goes away, and you're like, oh, what happened to me? So sometimes it can be a gradual process. It doesn't have to be, oh my God, the universe just ascended on my head. And Michael, why would you do this? You know what I mean? Your father, he's a wise man. You know what I mean? Why would you do this and everything? But no, but the thing is, but that's your thing. And if you play with it and allow yourself to really kind of dance with it, I suppose what you'll find is that it will start seeping into everything. And then you can step back. So what you'll do is, okay, there's a mind, I've got to focus on everything. Step back, go to that place prior to mind. Just step back, take a look at it. Take a look at the whole thing. Instead of going into the micro, step back and go into the macro. And then you see the bigger picture and then you can play. So what can happen in these talks is it can go very, very micro. So we're like, kind of like, we're dancing now. And then it's like, yeah, but you've got to be aware. And guess what? The beautiful thing is you can do both things simultaneously. So I'm talking to you, but I'm aware of everybody else in the room as well, because it's all part and parcel of it. But at this moment in time, the focus is there. So you can, by allowing it to seep into it and exploring these ideas, just explore them, play with them at your pace. Yes, I can imagine they're giving you hell about it, like, Dad, you're so unconscious and everything. Don't worry about them. Do you know what I mean? I think I'll sort them out later. What you do is you just literally just take your time with it, because there is this whole thing of, I've heard about this thing called realization and I've got to wake up. So I remember when I heard it, I was like, right, got to wake up. And when I wake up, I'm going to have the sports car, the blissed out lifestyle, the model girlfriend, and the six pack. That bit didn't really happen, do you know what I mean? But we won't talk about that because we had these ideas. And then what happens is
I thought I was going to end up sleeping on a park bench. That's
Seriously?
what was going to happen to me when I woke
thought I was
up.
going to end up with the Kardashians, but it didn't work, do you know what I mean? But I might tell the Kim Kardashian story then and everything. See, I'm playing now and everything. But you can play. You can play because you're in the moment, you're present. So by being present, you can actually, you'll see you can see more. Play with it. What you'll find is it will go into your work life. And you'll start seeing, you will work so much more efficiently. Because I remember doing a talk in Boston, there was a guy then, I was like, this, mate, you can apply this into your business. You can apply this into anything. Because ultimately, when you take all these ideas, wealth, relationships, all of this stuff, when you bring it down to zero, it always comes back to this. So then why not start here? So everyone's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'd say it's the wrong way around. So I say start with actualization and then go. And that's what ancient cultures did. So if you look at Bedouin tribes people, what they'll do is for the first 5, 6 years of their life, they'll take their child and they'll give them to someone who's wise. As Jean Piaget said, you know, give me the boy, I'll give you the man. So what you do is you concern yourself with yourself. And when you realize yourself, then you realize everything is all part and parcel of you. Life becomes very efficient. That job is just another aspect of you. Don't let it control you, control it. Similar to the butler. Your job is your butler. Your job is your butler. Can you wrest back control now by realizing that you gave it back?
I was just saying, you know, even over the last 3 to 5 years, I would say I'm different because
Yes.
Once you see it, then you can do something about it. Do you know what I mean? But it's not. The mind is still not an easy thing to control, and especially within the environment.
Let go of the idea that's not an easy thing to control. Let go of the idea, because how do you know that? Test it. Test it. Because this is the thing I think every mindful man I've ever come to, or every meeting I've ever done, everyone goes, yeah, this is all really great and wonderful, mate, but it's really difficult. How do you know that? And where's that thought emanated from? The mind. Most definitely. Do you know what I mean? I would say most definitely, because I'm going to take a position on this stuff. Your mind came out with that thought. So then what we can do is we can start looking at our thoughts and we can start kind of testing them. So, you know, I think there's a wonderful teacher in America called Byron Katie, and she uses like a 4-step process, and I think it's like, how, you know, what would I be without this thought? So what would you be without this thought? That it's difficult. And could you open your mind up slightly to the idea of just playing with it? Because that's what we're doing here. We're just playing with ideas. And then what we find is when we play, there's that spirit of inquiry, there's that spirit of inquisitiveness as well, because it's like, now what's he going to say next? But then we're engaged in a conversation. Very few people engage in a conversation. But there's a conversation better than this. And that's a conversation you have with yourself. If it's seeping into you, you can't unsee it now. So you're on your process. Enjoy it. Take your time with it. Savor it. Because we're in such a rush. We're in such a rush. Got to hear what he's talking about. Just take your time with it. Play with it. Allow the insights to come in. You can't force insight.
That's the other thing as well, just that from what you said, it can be the case where everyone else seems to be waking up, getting enlightened, having insights, their meditations are going smoothly, and you're just the stressed out one thinking, well, why isn't this happening to me? And it's not happening to you because you're not them. All of your heroes, that's somebody else. You are not going to have their awakening, their insights. Impossible. You will have your insights. I don't know what that will be. I had no idea what my own journey contained. It's still unfolding. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 seconds. But once upon a time, I thought I have to have Ramana Maharshi's insight. I have to write poems like Rumi, etc. It's more nonsense because you'll never achieve that. Your mind, the butler again, is saying it doesn't count unless it's like this. Now, it's nonsense. You're the only, what's your name again, sorry? Richard. So, you're the only Richard out of 8 billion people right now sat on this chair having this particular experience. Well, in the entire universe, and we don't know how big that is. It may be boundless. It may be infinite. Out of all of that infinity, you are the only person having this unique, specific experience right now. Isn't that already the treasure? It's here. It's like in plain sight. But your mind will say, well, until I'm as quiet as my wife or my kids. No, they've got their own journey. And, this is so unique to every human being. Some humans, they retreat into the caves. That's what they do. Step back and leave the world away. Other people, like Zahir, they play up. They cause chaos,
And yet there's order in this chaos.
And yet there's some wisdom in there.
The thing is, we've got this, we've got this whole Instagram culture now. And it's like, I've got to have more followers. And I've got to make sure that my selfie's better than hers. And there's so much pressure. But where did it come from? And it's always been there. It's a bit more prominent now, I suppose. And that's what you're suffering from. You're looking at the others and go, well, but they are, but I'm not. And I did the same thing. I remember, there were guys that come to the gatherings and they knew all the poetry. It was great. And I'd feel like a fraud. I'd be like sitting there, the teacher would walk in, I'd be terrified, okay? Then they'd jump on me as well. Oh, you're so unconscious and all this stuff, everything. You need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this. And it was pressure. It was pressure. And now I'm sitting here. And those guys are still chanting away, going on about undying love, but never really moved. Because ultimately, sometimes the external form isn't what it actually is. And ultimately, we can't read the condition of another's heart. And for all you know, you might be sitting somewhere that most of us aren't even sitting. And it's whether you can just accept that. Yes, I know there's pressure in this thing, I'm sitting there and, my other half, she's really understanding it and I just feel like a fraud. I'm sitting here and, they've dragged me along and I didn't really want to be here and, I always wanted to watch TV and yeah, it all happens. And then, the guy's focusing on me now and I really don't want him to focus on me because he's kind of taken a special interest in me now. And it's like, okay, I just came for a bit, but we don't know what we are. And that's where the exploration, the inquiry is so important. And as you said, you've already given us your position. It's seeping into you. Take your time with it. Like I said, you can't rush insight. It's like, we can't make vintage wine or whatever it is. I don't drink, so that's kind of weird. In 6 months. There's a process sometimes. And yet we can get caught up in that process and say, oh yeah, it's a journey and everything. But that process is happening in now. So we pick up everything and put it all down lightly. And that's what you do.
That's very enough. I mean, that's very useful.
Perfect.
Because you sense it yourself, you know what I mean? I can sense the change, you know, whether good, bad, whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
You know, you can sense it. But whenever you sit and have somebody say it, I think it's easier to sort of...
Look, you go home tonight with the two of them and you say, Mike spoke to me and Zahir spoke to me. Obviously, I'm special, okay? Lord it up over them. Do you know what I mean? When they start giving it, look, say, listen, I'm sitting there in the middle of the room, okay, they recognise my greatness. It's as simple as that and everything. Now go make me a cup of tea. Play up with it, do you know what I mean? Because it's important to have fun with this stuff. You know, so I was at this Sufi gathering, God, a couple of months ago, the Sheikh turned up, 2,000-3,000 people. He said a few things for about 10 minutes or so, and then he walked out. And there was this young guy there, he just started and everything, and everybody was in the robes and everything. And I just said, mate, just have fun with it. Because sometimes we take this stuff so seriously. If I could go back, I think I'd probably do the same thing the way, but it's just sometimes life's too precious to take seriously. And then we wake up one day and go, missed it. Do you know what I mean? There was that girl I wanted to tell her I loved her, and there was that relationship, and there was that other thing I wanted to do, and there was that business I wanted to run. And then we lie on our deathbeds going, I didn't really live. You know, I want to do this, but your time's done. And that's the thing, if we can see that every moment is precious, please, it's precious. You're beautiful, you're amazing.
Why not?
You know, why not? What are you doing? Go out there, do that thing, do you know what I mean? Live, you know, people like Rumi came for you, people like Ramana Maharishi came for you, people like the Buddha came to you to remind you of who you are. Then you might be something. Because all of this came as a reminder to you, to remind you of who you truly are. And that's a question we can't answer, and that's a question you have to discover in yourself. But come on, seriously, sitting in a room here talking about this stuff? There's this really, really beautiful thing that we were talking about earlier on. There's an author called Hanif Qureshi, and he was doing a book reading, and he opened his book and he went, all these people here to listen to an old man reading a book. How sad. And I'm not saying that, you know, like this was obviously better than that. But the thing is this, it's like there is life happening. And while we're looking for this life, it's passing us by. And yet, life is happening all the time, even in this room while we're looking for it. So you're looking for something that's already happening.
Well, it's the fish searching for the ocean,
Yeah,
is
exactly.
the traditional analogy.
Exactly.
You know, where's the ocean? Oh, I've maybe just glimpsed it. Have you found it? You know, oh, you've got the secret method to find the ocean. It's the ocean. You know, they're immersed in it. But that's why we can't see it. We're immersed in it. Any other questions or thoughts or?
Because Richard looks like he's monopolising the whole group. I apologise, everybody, you know what I mean, everything. No, I'm really kidding. I just like to play around sometimes.
Yeah, I've got one. How do I word it? Now that I'm learning more about mindfulness and meditation, I'm having difficulty with the concept of enjoying something, but also letting go of a sort of clingingness to it. Like, I don't really deal well with unexpected things happening that take away something that I'm really enjoying. How do I continue to enjoy something like that, but once it's gone, not have it affect me so much, if that makes sense?
Yeah, what a good question.
That's why I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I'm looking.
See what I did there? So you can play with this stuff.
So the first thing I would say is you don't have to stop being affected. You know, I mean, that might just be another idea your mind's come up with, you know, or that we think we then have to do. I was talking to someone recently, and they were asking a similar question: is how can I continue to enjoy life, and be detached?
Yeah.
Because the idea is that we need to detach. Now, what the heck does detach mean? How do we detach? You are completely, intricately interconnected with life. You know, the sounds you hear, the feelings, the sights, it's all this interactive, internal experience. How do you detach from that? You know, even when you die, You don't detach, you literally become integrated again into the elements and just continue. Well, where's the detachment? So I would say detachment is not literal. You cannot detach.
Yeah.
You know, you cannot stop something happening and say, I'm never going to attach again. We are attached, we're immersed in life. It's like the wave as part of the ocean. The wave cannot detach from the ocean. But what we can do is understand. That's all the traditions, in my experience, and hopefully Zahir would agree, they're not asking us to stop something. They're not asking us to make something go away. They're not asking us to change or fix or become perfect. It's just a matter of understanding. So how do we understand anything? We take a look. So we just observe that our natural temperament is to attach, is to like things and not want them to pass. And yet they do pass. Every single thing we've ever attached to, a thought, a feeling, a car, an experience, anything, it's all gone. Like right now, all we have is this particular moment happening. And that's just gone. So even if we want to attach, it's an impossibility. Like we can't hold any of this in our hands. It's already passing through. So the more you reflect on that and understand it, the orientation of your mind begins to flow more with reality. You know, it understands that everything comes and goes. I can't actually physically attach to anything. And actually then all the things that we want to keep and hold on to, we can, like the man making the cup of tea, use as opportunities to focus in. So for instance, you know, smoking, right? Smoking cigarettes, not good for your health, we can all agree. When I used to see Ramesh Balsekar in Mumbai, who's a guru I used to see, I used to think that all the people around him, his kind of entourage, would be very spiritual, you know, whatever that meant to me at the time. And yet the second the meeting finished and everyone left his apartment, everyone was lighting up, everyone was smoking, everyone was drinking black coffee, like fiends, you know. And I was thinking, this is strange, you know, I'm a vegan, I'm a macrobiotic, I'm doing yoga, and now I'm just in a cloud of smoke. You know, why aren't you trying to stop smoking? Because that wasn't his emphasis. It was just to understand. And in that way, you can use smoking as a way in, for instance. Like the two men in the monastery, and they liked smoking. And so one of them said to the other, do you think, you know, is there a way we can carry on smoking in this monastery? And so the man said, I'll go and ask the chief monk, see what he says. So he goes and knocks on the door and he says, I have a very important question for you. Do you mind if I smoke when I meditate? And the chief monk is furious. Absolutely not. That's a rule, a fundamental rule. You cannot smoke while you meditate. Get out. And so he reports this to his friend. And his friend says, can I ask? He says, be my guest. So his friend knocks on the door and he says, I have a really important question. Can I meditate whilst I smoke? He says, yeah. So, and this relates back to what Richard was saying as well. The obstacle isn't really an obstacle, it's an invitation. We just might not like it. You know, the school rush, whatever the problem is, it doesn't need to be a problem. And the way you deproblemize, which is a word I've just made up, is that you focus into it. You become one with the busyness that's happening. So you become one with the experience that's happening. In fact, in one Hindu tradition, one of the names for the enlightened yogi or master is the super enjoyer. Now that's completely against our ideas of detachment, and I'm not going to live a human life. I'm going to put that around. No, they're the super enjoyers. Now what does that mean? It means when they sip coffee, it's ecstatic. When they, put their shoes on, the feeling is ecstatic. When they walk down the street with the breeze on their face, they're the super enjoyers. They can't hold on to any of it because it comes and goes. They don't need to detach from it in that sense. We just need to be completely with the throb of life as it happens. And then the idea of, do I need to attach? How do I detach? It just falls away and you're just living in the moment. You're just alive. Does that...
No, I really like that phrase, that term, the super enjoyment.
Yeah, it's amazing,
when
isn't
they're
it?
experiencing something negative or in a lot of pain, they can still fully enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a sense. I mean,
They
it
can be
sounds...
present.
You can be present to it, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not, I can't be present because I'm in pain. It's, no, you can be present with pain. It's just not easy, but you can.
It's a recontextualization.
Exactly.
Of experience.
Exactly.
How about this? How do you separate from yourself? Try that one. How do you separate from yourself? No idea why I said that. Just felt should say it. But how do you separate from yourself? Because it's all you.
Yeah.
So all of that's happening in you. All the experience is happening in you.
Yes, it's not something to remove or get rid of. It's all you, in that sense. You know, what's happening in your toes is you. You know, the fear in the belly is you. The breath in your body is you. Not the you that lives in your head, but a more expansive, alive you. And this is the whole thing. It's, you know, it's about being fully human. Fully awake, fully human. But that's the scary thing, because we've spent so much of our life shutting down our humanity, because it's scary.
It's like you take the entire ocean and you try and put it into a glass. And its inherent nature is that it knows it's the ocean, it will always go home. It will always go home. And I think that's why, you know, we find such resistance in these straitjacketed lives. Because everybody here knows exactly what's going on. It's just they've got this story that's covering them up. And it's supposedly safe for them. And it provides security. So, you know, this is probably not a good place to come then in that case if you enjoy the security of your story. But if you want to kind of unravel the thread, then this is the best place to come. But also realize that in that humanity, that story will stay intact. So that fear that might be there, oh my God, you know, I remember somebody once saying, I don't want to wake up because I don't want to forget my wife or my daughter. And sounds absolutely crazy, but it was a genuine concern. And then lo and behold, he has this awakening, and the first thing I said to him, I go, do you remember your wife and daughter? And he was like, well, yeah, of course, because nothing's ever forgotten here. But the thing is, I think one of the things that's happened this evening is, it's been about taking these ideas and sort of like saying, you know, these ideas that you've got about spirituality, let's test them. And what we find is most of them are completely wrong. And they cause fear in us, and they cause resistance in us, and it causes us not to accept what's actually happening. So I think that's the benefit of actually just being in these places, of actually kind of saying, okay, so I think it's like this. And the person goes, well, yeah, I think it is, but no, maybe not. But ultimately, it's you directing this whole conversation. The talk has been created by you, by all of you, because there wasn't really a plan. We kind of like, okay, do we have an idea of where we're going to go? All of a sudden, the mind has been playing up all evening. We've been looking at it from different angles. So in a sense, it's like this came together to know itself, and it asked itself questions, and it met itself. And in that sense, it never separated from itself. It's meeting itself. It's a conversation of one. There's no two here. And it will accept itself when it wants to, but it knows that it's in control of this whole process, because when we realize that our true nature is prior to mind, then all of you are just doing what you need to be doing at this moment in time. So there is control, but control from that place of perfect isness, this immediacy. Because consciousness is your true nature, that's who you truly are. That's the reminder, but you already know that. So what we're really doing is we're just playing. You know, life is just a play. You know, and we're just playing here. That's all we ever do, we just play. Life is but a walking shadow that struts and frets its hour upon the stage. It is a tale told by a fool, full of sound of fury. In the end, it signifies nothing. Shakespeare. Can't believe I actually got that quoted. The best one was, I don't know if, has anybody ever watched the film The King and I? Brynner? Am I really showing my age now? You know, it's kind of occasionally I like to play up and everything. There's a line in the book where he just goes, a line in the film where he goes, a woman has written a book. And I thought, got to get this into a talk and everything, and managed to get it in twice. But that's what I'm saying, play with this stuff. Don't take it too seriously. The minute you take it seriously, then we're into those questions then we're into that staticness, then we're into something that stagnates, and it forms, and it becomes crystallized, and it becomes a religion, or it becomes an ideology. And this thing is, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, ever fresh and ever new. So it will always constantly move, adapt, which whatever form it needs to be, because you're not static, you're not something contracted. It may appear as if you're contracted in this so-called body-mind, but that expansion can happen in this contraction, and that's just that recognition of self.
That's the lostness. You know, the beauty of being lost was
There
where we
you
started.
go. Perfect. Absolutely
Bring it back.
perfect.
Thanks, Mike.
You have an artist and a genius amongst your midst. You know what I mean? That's all I can say.
But that's
yeah,
the lostness, isn't it? It's
Yes.
not landing somewhere with, oh, now I know.
I need
no,
to hold
you don't.
something. I need to know
Yeah,
something. Yeah,
that's just more luggage. This is, you know.
Yeah. That's it. So there you go. There you go. You got your beginning, you got your middle, you got your end. And you've got this perfect symphony. And I'm telling you right now, we didn't plan any of this. It was just like, I've recently started saying, open my mouth and hope for the best. But there is a beauty in being lost. But be lost. Really, really, be lost. But that's when you're found. Because then what happens is you just let go. And each of you is unique in your own way, and you run your journeys. The way you run your journeys. You have your understandings and everything. That's why there is no such a thing as teaching here, because it would be arrogance to assume that we could teach you anything about you. There are experiences that you've all had that we possibly have never had. So really the teaching thing's a misnomer, because it's kind of just really to remind you. So like the Roman emperors, we're just those people standing next to you saying, remember who you are, remember who you are, remember who you are. And when that remembrance happens, then there's no need for any of this. And then we're just alive and free. But the paradox of it all is that you realize I was always alive and free. So the sincerest wish is that you accept that and be who you are.
Thank you very much. Hope that was useful.
Thank you.
Thank you.